Good morning, y'all. We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. As always, I am your host, Justin Michael. Happy December 6th. Happy birthday, Mom. Big shout out to my loving mother, Amy, who, frankly, I obviously would not be here without. Biologically, that's pretty simple. But, my parents worked their tail off when I was growing up to put me in a position to where I could attend CSU and go to my dream school and ultimately live out my dream, which is to talk about sports for a living. And I just, honestly, one of the biggest reasons that I try and work so hard and have busted my ass to try and make it in this industry is I don't want to let them down. So a big shout out to my mom. I love you so much. And thank you for always having my back and put me in a position to be able to do this awesome career. We've got a busy show today. We're talking hoops, big game against CU tomorrow. I'll be in Boulder. If you are going to be at the Coors Event Center, say what's up. I'd love to say hi to you. We're going to be talking a little bit more about the 2025 signees and this recruiting class. I kind of gave my instant reaction yesterday, was able to do a little bit deeper dive into the huddle clips of these guys. So I'm going to give a couple more thoughts. Talk about what intrigues me about this group. Talk about some of the standouts. Not the biggest in terms of size, but I do think that this is a quantity versus quality debate, and I'm really intrigued by a couple of the guys that they got on both sides of the ball. If you're rocking on YouTube with us this morning, good morning. Throw us a thumbs up. Big shout out to all of you. Would not be able to do this without you. But I wanted to start here with the news that came out this morning, which is that CSU football is going to be hiring a general manager. They're bringing over Alex Collins, who has been the assistant AD for recruiting operations at Ole Miss. He has worked with the Rebels for the last 5 years. Prior to that, worked under Norvell at Nevada as an analyst. So they do have a previously established relationship. This is a growing trend in college football, hiring a general manager. I think it makes a lot of sense on multiple levels. First off, recruiting is such an intensive process these days. You really need individuals to kind of specialize and put all their efforts into very specific elements of it. Whereas, say, 20 years ago, I think a lot of these different jobs could more or less be filled by one person. There would be staffs and you would delegate stuff out. But between player retention, which is basically its own job but in its own right at this point, trying to hang on to the players you literally already have in the building, and the negotiation process and NIL and everything that goes into that. You need somebody to focus on schmoozing the donors, and in a lot of ways, that's kind of been Tim Cassidy's role. I do wonder if this move is implying that Cassidy will be officially retiring again. He was retired before he joined Norvell's staff here a couple years ago. They honored him after senior day. He had a jersey for his 500th win. They gave him a game ball too. So kind of reading between the lines there, it does seem like that could be in the mix. I'm not reporting that for the record, but I'm just saying I do wonder if this is a sign that is a move that is coming this summer, or maybe has already happened. I guess we'll kind of see what happens there. But yeah, I mean, this is just, it's such a different game than it was 20 years ago. And when you're a coach, you just can't do it all. You need guys to focus specifically on the transfer portal. You need guys to be locked into high school recruiting. You need guys to be locked into the donor process. It's just so intensive these days. There really is no off season. Dolph Renaud wants to know real quick, and then we'll get back on track here. Any intel on why Ty Olson wasn't offered a spot? This recruiting class has a legacy. He wanted to be a Ram, but it didn't work out. I get Jay can't sign everyone, but he seemed to check all of the boxes. Yeah, that was a little bit surprising to me as well. Ty, the son of Eric Olson, who was a receiver at CSU in the 90s, really productive player for Del Norte, I believe, out in California, signed with San Jose State yesterday. I know he did take an official visit back in June, so I don't have any insight specifically in terms of what that process was like with him. I assumed because he took an OV that he would have gotten an offer. So I guess I'll have to ask about that and see if I can get any details. Does feel like a guy that would have been a natural fit at CSU. I was hoping that the Rams would land him. They have obviously focused on a couple of legacy athletes these last couple of years, bringing in Jack Moran. I wonder if maybe they tried to go the PWO route. I know they do that a lot with some local players and guys that have connections to the staff. You only have so many scholarships. Sometimes you try and convince people to come into the program that way, basically for the love of the game. But yeah, that is a little bit surprising to me. But yeah, I do think that hiring a GM, again, just with so much going on, it makes a lot of sense in modern college football. We'll see what that means in terms of staff designations. I wonder if maybe Colton Bosnos, who is the DFO at the moment, kind of transitions into some of that stuff that Cassidy does. And then you bring in Olson to handle more of the day-to-day recruiting and that type of stuff. That would make a lot of sense to me. We shall see. I will keep you guys informed as the information becomes available. The other big news that we had in the Mountain West this morning / future Pac-12 is that Utah State has hired Bronco Mendenhall. That is now official. Mendenhall was at UNM this year, worked at BYU for a long time, had a decent stint at Virginia as well. Took him to their first ever Orange Bowl back in 2019. Tough 24 hours for New Mexico football, man. Dampier and Wysong both enter the portal. You get poached by a football program in your own conference, at least for the time being, for one more season. I will say there have been a lot of jokes this year coming from Air Force, from UNLV, from New Mexico fans about kind of mocking the Pac-12 and, the Mountain West being just as good or superior, even. I've seen some people try and claim. To me, this is a pretty clear indication that coaches would rather be on that Pac-12 side moving forward. And I think a lot of that has to do with potential access to the college football playoff. I really think that this year was kind of rejuvenating for a lot of coaches at the G5 level programs that are, not just guaranteed spots, into the spotlights. With the respect that Boise State has gotten and even UNLV, I think a lot of coaches are kind of recognizing like it might be a better path to the playoff or a more viable path to the playoff in one of these leagues like the Pac-12 than trying to coach up, say, like a Mississippi State, where you're the 8th or 9th best gig at best in the SEC. The type of gig that I think in the 4-team playoff you would leave for without a doubt. Now, there's probably certain amounts of money that you could throw at coaches that would, still make that a no-brainer for some, but I don't think it's such a clear-cut decision. Like, yeah, you would bolt in a heartbeat the way that it was 5-6 years ago. Because of that, I do think the Pac-12 is appealing. I think places where you've had success and there's a commitment to athletic excellence, like at CSU, like at Boise State, like at Utah State invests in a major way. It makes a lot of sense. I am interested to see what happens with some of these players. Do any of them follow? Nick wants to know in the Toyota chat. Do you speculate that Dampier goes to Utah State? I always guessed he was heading to a P4. We'll see. I can't, because I'm not on that beat locally, I'm not sure what the relationship is like with Dampier and Mendenhall. Mendenhall isn't who signed him or brought him into the program. He certainly allowed him to flourish this year, and I could see him wanting to stick with Mendenhall. But New Mexico's offensive coordinator is Utah bound. That's an interesting dynamic I would keep an eye on. That would kind of be funny if it played out that way, is if Mendenhall ends up in Logan at Utah State and then potentially Dampier, Utah's had some quarterback situations. Would he follow their OC from Albuquerque to Salt Lake City, and then you'd end up having a showdown between Mendenhall and Dampier? That could happen. My gut is that he ends up P4. I think there's just going to be too much money thrown at him for him to turn it down. He is an incredible athlete. He was first team all conference for a reason. He has just got playmaking abilities that are next level. I do wonder, is his best chance to be a quarterback at a school like Utah State? If he goes P4, are they going to try and make him a running back or like a slot receiver? He's obviously an incredible athlete. I think he throws the football better than he gets credit for, to be honest, has better touch. But I definitely am interested to see what happens there. My gut is that Wysong would be more likely to follow Mendenhall to Utah State than Dampier. And Wysong's a stud too. That would be a big pull for them. But I think that's a really good hire for Utah State. I think there's some storylines there that you can focus on when it comes to the futures of the Mountain West and the Pac-12. But ultimately, I do feel bad for New Mexico. That's a really gutting feeling. You have this big revival, and it feels like you're in the midst of an ascension. And then in one day, you're arguably worse off than you were before Mendenhall came, because Danny Gonzalez kind of had that program close. You know, they were knocking at the door there for 2 years. I felt like they were in a lot of games. They had shown a lot of progress, and then Mendenhall kind of took it to the next level. They didn't have the depth necessary to get over that hump, and obviously losing that game against Hawaii was a real gut punch. Maybe for the best now anyways, if you're a New Mexico fan, just being honest. That would have been, in my opinion, even more disappointing if you did make a bowl game, you thought it was going to be this great big moment, and then he still ends up leaving, because he probably leaves regardless of whether they make a bowl or not. I don't really think that factored into the decision, and at that point, highly unlikely that Dampier and Wysong would have played in the bowl, and that could have been deflating. Might have been a situation kind of like Nevada post Norvell, where you end up playing a bowl with a skeleton roster, and it's just not a good spot to be in as a program. Will be an interesting couple of years with some of these Mountain West schools in terms of where does their investment go, because it's kind of a wake-up call moment if you're New Mexico, and I'm sure they would have put more money into the program under Mendenhall anyways, who had found some success. But we've seen Nevada go out publicly and say, we're going to build a practice facility. We're going to go all in on football because we have to. It's now or never. Does New Mexico do the same? Or do they really just lean into hoops and essentially be like, this is what we're going to be? We're going to be a basketball school. Interesting couple of years coming up with these murky waters in college athletics. I mean, student athletes being deemed full-time employees will throw a wrinkle in that. There's just a lot of different storylines here that are going to come up over the next couple of seasons. We'll see what happens with it all. We're going to move on. We're going to get into some takeaways on these 2025 signees. After that, I'll talk hoops, play some clips of Niko Medved, kind of talking about what has changed for this team with their mindset. I've been much better on the glass of late. I'm also going to play some clips of him talking about getting baptized by fire. And while the start of this season has been, it's been a gut punch at times, there's certainly been some lumps. You grow a lot more in some of these tough moments than you do by just blowing out crappy schools. And I think there's some value to that, especially with a roster that has some veteran pieces and seemingly has studied the boat a little bit. I think they're starting to figure it out. But like I said, we are going to take a break right here. I'm going to shout out our partners, and we're going to start with the best of the best vehicle in town. That, of course, Toyota. Trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA. For generations, Toyota has built durable legends destined for greatness and perfect for Colorado. Whether you're conquering off-road trails or whether you're cruising around Cap Hill, Toyota has a vehicle that's all right for you. The 2024 Tacoma is sweet. I want one so bad. The iconic 2024 Land Cruiser is back as well. They've got 17 models with available all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive like the Epic 4Runner. They also offer more low and zero emission vehicles combined than any other automaker to give customers numerous choices to reduce their carbon footprint. 16 hybrid vehicles to choose from, like the Tundra iForce Max hybrid truck, not to be outdone. Toyota SUVs take command on the road and on the trail, so you can explore the road less traveled without sacrificing smooth city rides in SUVs like the RAV4 and Grand Highlander. Toyota, a proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. I also want to talk to you guys about Game Time. We've got a fun time of year coming up. Growing up, I used to always love being on winter break and bowl season and college basketball and the NBA and the NHL picking up, and the obviously you've got the playoff push on the NFL side. Like, there's just so much going on as a sports fan. And with Game Time, it's the best way to get tickets and the best deals possible to all of that. Whatever you're into, Game Time has it. If you're looking for Broncos tickets, Nuggets tickets, maybe you want to hit up Boulder this weekend, check out Game Time. And what's great is they've introduced this new feature. It's a little curation feature called Game Time Picks. What it does, it shows you only the best of the best. You don't have to waste your time scrolling through thousands of tickets. They're going to show you, boom, this is the best we have to offer. You're going to be all in on it. They have the best and most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing game. And with the lowest price guarantee, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you can find tickets in the same section in the same row for less. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use that code DNVR for $20 off. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code DNVR for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Edwin says, to be honest, not to put down the current recruits, but I thought Pac-12 realignment would have gotten us more attention. I guess I'll need a little bit more clarity on what you mean by that. It's not the flashiest in terms of recruiting rankings. I think that whole model is broken, to be frank. They don't have enough full-time employees around the country anymore to give accurate breakdowns for a lot of these guys. There's such a big emphasis on the big regions, you know, the Houstons, the Floridas, the Southern Californias of the world, that I think a lot of guys, particularly like in the Midwest, even in Colorado, they go pretty under the radar. I don't think they're getting the same type of consistent and accurate coverage, I guess, would be my biggest beef when it comes to the whole, you know, star process and how these sites kind of do things. I'm not to say that there's no value there, because what they're essentially looking for is traits that are going to then, you know, translate at this level and then even further. What they're really looking for is like NFL players, and that's kind of what it's based on. Similarly to the NFL draft, in the way they kind of evaluate guys, it's based on not just like statistical production, but like, how are you going to grow? You know, how are you going to take what you've shown and then take it to the next level? And the problem with that is it's really subjective, and they don't really do a good job of explaining, you know, he is a 3-star prospect because so-and-so traits, or he is a 5-star because this, and this. Now, if you're looking at some of these guys coming out of IMG or something like that, there's going to be a lot more access to information, and that makes it easier to get an eval. With some of these guys coming out of smaller schools, you know, you kind of have to trust the staff and know that they know what they're looking for. There was a quote from Brett Bielema, the Illinois coach, and I think I just butchered that pronunciation, but you know who I'm talking about. Was that Arkansas, I think, before that? But he was talking about a wide receiver that he signed out of a region that, you know, was a little bit under the radar, didn't get quite as much coverage. And he said, you know, if this kid comes out of Fort Lauderdale, he's going to be a 5-star. And I think that really is a factor, and that context goes a long way. And I think that's certainly the case with some of these prospects that CSU is signed in this 2025 class. You know, it's not the flashiest, it's not the sexiest class in the world, but the guys fill specific needs. They have athletic profiles that translate, and I'll kind of get into that here. We'll give some general takeaways on the offense and the defense. I'll give some thoughts on some of these individuals specifically as well. But I guess we can start here offensively with the offensive line. Signed 3 offensive linemen, averaged 6'3", 317 pounds, a little bit smaller in terms of height than last year's group, which I think averaged around 6'5". Weight-wise, right around the same, though you can throw in that Sione Natane weighing 350 pounds is going to skew that average slightly in only a 3-person group. But all these guys move really well. They carry their weight. Bill Best, in general, has done a tremendous job of rebuilding the offensive line these last couple years. It just was not good enough. They didn't have big enough bodies. They didn't have athletic enough individuals. It was ironic. Like, Steve Addazio came in, and that was supposed to be his calling card, was rebuilding the O-line, and he signed a bunch of dudes that were like 6'1", 260 pounds, and hired his son as the O-line coach with 0 O-line experience. Never even played O-line. Dude was a tight end. But Bill Best has really, in a quick fashion turn this offensive line around. They were incredible this year. 2 straight years they've been great in pass protection overall. This year they ran the ball with a lot more consistency. I think some of that had to do with having a deeper running back room and just having more talent and athleticism in that running back room. But a lot of it had to do with the offensive line. I saw a stat the other day that talked about a CSU, one of the best teams in the country at running the ball between the tackles, going out and finding these big bodied guys that move well. That's a big part of what has allowed CSU to have this success. I really liked a couple of the offensive linemen they brought in the last couple of cycles. Philip Ocon is a guy I've been really high on for a couple of years now. Tanner Morley, obviously I've been raving about for 2 years, and he has certainly lived to the hype. I feel like this staff does a really good job of finding offensive linemen that translate. Really, really intrigued by this group. I guess I could give you some of the names for those that maybe didn't listen to yesterday's show. They signed Kentez Allen. He's 6'2", 295 out of Georgia. One of the first players that committed in this class. I like the way he moves. He had a couple of offers from the service academies as well as Georgia State. And it's funny, I don't think you think of the service academies in terms of, well, if they're offering them, that must be a player that you would want. But I actually, in certain positions, offensive line, defensive line, and linebackers, I would want to offer the guys that Calhoun is after, because they have had a highly athletic front seven for about 5 years now, and their O-line has been the backbone of their success throughout the tenure of Calhoun. So I like that. I like that Sione Natane picked CSU over Army and Arizona State, who came on him late. Shows me he's a loyal guy. It was funny. Natane, he committed in June when he took his official visit, didn't post about it until like August. I had a pre-write and totally forgot about it. I got some insight from the staff. They were like, yeah, it's not him. He's not in it for social media, for clicks, for the attention. Dude went out and was working in the summer, went and spent some time with his grandmother, I believe was the story. So sounds like a really good kid. And obviously that frame at 6'3", 350 at that age, that's some serious body to work with. Yesterday they announced the addition of the lone JUCO signee for this class so far. And that is Monjero Senegal, goes by MJ, 6'4", 305. I assume he's going to be a guard. From what I read, there's not a ton of information out there on him. He's a Fresno native, spent the last 2 years at Feather River Junior College. From what I read, he began his career as an outside linebacker, so he should be able to move pretty well. Would have been a massive outside linebacker if he really is 300 pounds. But will be interesting to see kind of what happens with him there, and I'll try and get some more insight for you guys on that. Sticking with the offense, they did lose a couple of wide receiver commits out of Texas that ended up flipping to P4s. Tristan Glass ended up at Wake Forest. They had Michael Dever ended up at Texas Tech, I believe. But they did bring in a couple of guys, and they feel like typical Jay Norvell wide receivers. Antoine Martin Jr., he's 5'11", 170 out of Iowa Colony High School in Texas. They brought in Clarence Taylor, 5'11", 150 pounds. Both those guys going to have to put some weight on. But both of those guys, if they're 2 inches taller and 15 pounds heavier, they're starting in the Big 12 or SEC with how well they move. And that's kind of what you have to do if you're a program like CSU. You have to get creative, find good athletes. And I think this class in general is very, very athletic on both sides of the ball. They're going to be able to move well. Antoine Martin averaged 21 yards of reception. Clarence Taylor, he's a guy that led the state of Alabama in receiving yards as a junior. Had another 1,000-yard season this year as well. Those two wide receivers, they combined for 53 touchdowns and 3,824 yards over the last 2 years. That is incredible production. When you watch them, to me, if I had to come up with a comp of guys that you're used to seeing of late, I would say that Martin maybe going to be closer to like an Armani Winfield. A lot of quick screens underneath, a lot of slants. He is fast. He's got a 4.4 speed. He's a track star. You get him the ball in space, and he's going to burn you. You know, quick slants, all that kind of stuff. Also vertical down the shot or down the sideline there. You could do some shot plays to him. I feel like he feels Armani Winfield-esque. I would say that the kid out of Alabama, Taylor, he's maybe a little bit closer to Caleb Goody. Just a freaking burner, man. Like every single one of his clips is him running with 30 yards of separation and just catching bombs left and right. I think both of those guys have an opportunity to come in and potentially, compete for playing time. It takes a little bit of time to get your feet underneath you as a receiver. But when you're that athletic, when you run the way that those guys do, you can also just kind of come up with plays to get the ball in their hands. You don't have to know the entire playbook to be able to go out there for a quick screen. You don't have to know the entire playbook for us to hand you the ball in a jet motion and just see if we can get you to the edge, even like a deep shot, some vertical stuff. It'll be a while, until you're out there consistently, but I'm really excited about those guys. And I think they have really significant potential. Now you got to be able to retain them. That's been a little bit of a struggle for CSU. I feel like the goals that were outlined when this staff came in from a recruiting standpoint, they have accomplished. They talked about wanting to get bigger and more athletic defensively. They've done that. And some of the young guys, especially, are really starting to pop on that side of the ball. Offensively, in the trenches, they wanted to get bigger and more athletic as well. They've definitely done that. Receiver, they needed to get bigger. They needed to get faster. I don't know if they've gotten, I guess as a whole, they got bigger, then they lost some of those guys. We'll see. Retaining receivers is always going to be kind of a process in the modern era, but these guys are really, really exciting. And they add to what, even with the departures, is an intriguing young group of receivers right now. I mean, Jordan Ross has a really bright future. Levon Brown, who was on the field late in the season, he's a guy that runs really well. On top of that, I think these guys are going to help the offense, make some big plays down the line. I also really like the tight end, Brock Camp. He's got great size. Let's see here, 6'5", it's like 240, 250, 6'5", 250 out of Missouri. He's a mountain of a man. Played both football and basketball for Hickman High School. Scored more than 1,000 points on the hardwood. This is the low-hanging fruit here. Easy comp, but he's a big dude that moves really well. Surprisingly, they throw him a lot of screens and balls underneath for a guy that's 6'5", 250. He runs pretty well. Caught 27 touchdowns, produced more than 2,000 yards. You like guys that have the basketball background there because they just move a little bit different. You develop different muscles, some lateral movement just from banging in the paint and stuff like that. I think he, like a Antonio Gates, like a Tony Gonzalez, like Brock Camp fits that mold. He feels like maybe a Cole Turner type. They've been kind of trying to find that since they came over to CSU. Dallin Holker was a stud, but he wasn't like Cole Turner. He's not 6'6". You're not just going to throw the ball up and let him go get it. More of a possession tight end. Camp feels more in that Turner route, thicker than Vince Brown, who we thought could maybe be that style of tight end as well. But really intriguing. I think the pass catchers are intriguing. And we haven't even talked about Kennard, Javion Kennard, 5,900 all-purpose yards, 44 total touchdowns. Reminds me a little bit of Justin Marshall when he was coming out of Indiana a couple years ago. Kennard's out of Tennessee. He can kind of do it all. He was sort of a slot receiver, sort of a running back. He was a dynamic returner. I think he's really exciting there as a punt returner and a kick returner. Not the biggest guy in the world, and that's probably why he ultimately ended up at CSU and not a P4, listed at 5'8", 165. But he has game-breaking speed. I mean, his vision is incredible. He's so shifty and he runs low to the ground. He kind of disappears there, in the trenches. But I'm excited about him, man. They've got some real bursts coming into this group, and he feels like he could be a big-time playmaker. I'm going to keep talking about this. I'm going to give a couple more thoughts on the defense. I'll give you a couple of takeaways on some really intriguing individuals. The defense, if I had to pick, what are you more excited about, the offense or the defense in this cycle? Probably the defense. That's not to say that I don't think these offensive players are exciting. It's just that I'm very much in on a couple of these defensive players. Real quick, I'm going to take one more break. I do want to shout out our partners over at Coors Light. They encourage you to choose a chill mindset between everything life throws our way. It's easy to get worked up. Social media, politics, it's all kind of a crap show. It feels like sports are the sweet, sweet escape, but it's important. That stuff can really add up. It can wear on you. It can make you not very pleasant to be around. You want to make sure you're constantly being mindful and putting yourself in that chill state of mind. Once you are, kick back and relax. Crack open an ice cold Coors Light. When the mountains turn blue, it's as cold as the Rockies. Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smooth finish. When you embrace a chill mindset, good time to choose chill and crack open a Coors Light. Coors Light is mountain cold refreshment, crisp and refreshing as the Colorado Rockies. Make the most out of the times you choose to chill. Choose Coors Light. Get it delivered straight to your door with Instacart by going to CoorsLight.com/DNVR. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. Racing to Raisin Canes as well. Turbocharge that order. I could use some Raisin Canes right now, to be honest. Didn't have a chance to eat before the show. Now I'm sitting here having to talk about those hand-battered chicken fingers. It's torture. Crispy crinkle cut fries, buttery Texas toast, that sweet cane sauce. You cannot go wrong. Pro move, order an extra piece of Texas toast. Nobody needs coleslaw. Throw a little sauce on there. Make yourself a chicken Sammy. For cooked to order hand-battered chicken fingers, race into Raisin Canes. Turbocharge your chicken fingers. Get them even faster by ordering online at raisincanes.com or through the mobile app. Raisin Canes Chicken Finger, one love. All right, we're going to talk hoops here in just a second, preview that CU matchup, get into some final thoughts, all of that. Defensively, though, I thought it was interesting that there were over 30 touchdowns scored by guys that will be playing the defensive side of the ball for CSU. And that's because that's really the approach that the Rams go with. They're not really worried about positional experience. It's about athletic traits. They've had a lot of success taking skill players, moving them over to safety, moving them over to linebacker. A lot of these guys play two ways at high school level anyways, but you're able to refine that, especially receivers and safeties. They've had quite a bit of success transitioning to linebacker. You know, if you're a 5-star linebacker coming out of Alabama or whatever, you're not going to land in the Mountain West if you're, 6'4", 240 and you run a 4.4. Like, those guys get scooped up pretty quickly. The defensive players in general are hard to recruit at this level. Defensive tackles, corners, backers, like, they just get stockpiled by the bigger schools. And because of that, you have to get creative. And, oftentimes at the high school level, your most athletic players, you're going to have at running back, you're going to have at receiver, you're going to be trying to get the ball in their hands. They might not necessarily be a receiver at the collegiate level, but they have that athleticism. And that's what's going to translate. Also, I think it gives you a different perspective. You see the field a little bit differently if you're a linebacker that started at wide receiver and played safety. You're going to be rangy. You're going to be able to cover a lot of ground. And that's why I'm really excited about Cannon Valenzuela. I had him on the podcast a couple of months back. Just seems like an incredible kid, really high character, hard worker. Dad's a football coach, so has all the right habits. But what I especially loved about him and Branston, the defensive lineman coming out of Arizona, is they committed to CSU early on in the process before having quite a few big schools come sniffing. They remain loyal. They stayed true to their word. I think the relationships that were established go a long way there. But I also think they understand there's going to be an opportunity to see the field early on in their career. You're losing a lot of veterans on that defensive side of the ball. Basically in all three levels, you're going to have to bring in guys to kind of fill some gaps there. There could be some opportunities for early playing time. And as we've seen, this staff is willing to play you early. They're willing to play Owen Long in year 2. He would have played in year 1 if he didn't get hurt. Drew Rodriguez has started to play his way into the mix. Kennedy McDowell the last couple of years. Like, if you do the right things, if you're athletic enough, you're going to get an opportunity on this defense. On top of that, I love that they rotate a ton. So, it just gives a multitude of individuals an opportunity to compete. And that was kind of not the case for a couple years there. It was really dependent on like Patchen and Toby McBride, Manny Jones. Those dudes were all playing like 90 plus snaps. You're going to play half of that at CSU, but it's going to allow you to stay fresh. It's going to allow a lot more people to make an impact. I got a question here from James. There are 3 stars in Colorado that are dying to go to CSU, but they barely give them the time of day. Look, man, I did a whole rant on Colorado recruiting yesterday. I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings. Usually the people that are upset, it's because they know an individual that is being overlooked. I understand it. You want guys locally to get an opportunity, and I do think there will be some Colorado kids that are going to be coming home. But you can't sign Colorado kids solely for the sake of signing Colorado kids. You got to sign Colorado kids that translate. There's maybe 10 to 15 a year that are going to be D1 starters. 10 of those are going to end up at P4. It's just the reality. It has been for 20 years. You can't then settle and be like, all right, we didn't land the local kids we wanted, so we're going to sign these other local kids who we're not really sure if they're going to translate or not, solely because, we want to appease locals and we want to have the presence. Now, you've got to maintain those relationships. And I've talked about, I think it would benefit this staff from, maybe having somebody with some local ties that is just more active locally. But when you look at the caliber of athlete that CSU is pulling out of Phoenix, that they're pulling out of Southern California, out of Texas, these are legit players. And while I understand, like, we want to have that strong Colorado presence, like, you can't get emotional about this. This is a business, and we're trying to build the best possible football team. Now, if there's a guy that they think is going to translate, they're going to be in on him. And they have been in on a lot of these kids that have ended up at Iowa State, that have ended up at USC, that have ended up at Kansas State. It's tough. It's tough when you're competing with the flash of the P4. But I do think we have to be realistic about the amount of D1 players that are realistically going to come out of Colorado in any given cycle. And being completely real with you, this year especially is weak. Next year looks great. There's like 5-6 dudes that are probably going to be in that 4-star, maybe even higher type range. Was not the case this year. It's going to happen sometimes. You got to fish where the fish are, and there's going to be a lot more success hitting on some of these guys out of like Houston and San Diego and areas like that. I get it's frustrating, but there's just a lot more people there. That's really what it comes down to. It's a numbers game. You want to land the local kids, and a lot of those guys that are kind of fringe, I think you try and convince to go the PWO route, like come in as a walk-on, you get in-state tuition, and then earn your spot. If you're good enough, you'll get that scholarship. If not, a lot of those kids end up going FCS. A lot of them go to smaller schools, and that's fine. CSU does not need to sign every single kid out of Colorado. And I just think we get a little bit too emotional about the process at times. I think it's always fun when you have those Colorado kids. I think they take great pride in representing CSU when it does happen to work out. I also think it's fair to say most kids that grow up in Colorado these days, I don't think they're dying to play at CSU and CU. They didn't grow up with CSU and CU being winners. They're just, this isn't 2000s where you had the McCartney era in Boulder and Sonny just killing it in Fort Collins. Like, so many of these kids grow up, college football locally is irrelevant to them. And I think we romanticize how much some of these local kids, at least the ones that are legitimately going to translate at this level and could play at bigger schools, how much of those guys actually would want to come here. That's my opinion on it. Again, I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings, not trying to put local kids down. I love Colorado high school football. I love it. I follow it. I'm looking at Max Preps every weekend, seeing what's happening. I want to know what my alma mater's doing, Bear Creek. I want to know, what the big programs are doing. I'm super into it. I just think you have to be realistic. And, this is kind of a down year. Evan says, not sure if this is too much, but anyway, to have a roster tracker with holes from senior portal players leaving and update as we add recruits from the portal would be nice to visualize what the projected roster is through the offseason. Yeah, I'll come up with something for you guys. Right now, if you go on the site, we've got a transfer tracker, which only has the departures. And we've got a signing day tracker, which has the high school signees. I'll come up with something that is a little bit more all-encompassing and kind of lays out what are the holes right now, where should we keep an eye on moving forward, all that fun stuff. Getting back on track, got a little sidetracked. I want to give a couple more takeaways on the defense before we move on to basketball. Not the biggest group, the D linemen coming out of Arizona. I think they're going to average about 6'1". Let's see here. What are they listed at? Listed at 6'1", 260. Jackson Murray, 6'2", 265. For Caden Branson, so basically, 6'1", 262-ish for the average of those two. Murray chose CSU over offers from Air Force and Army. He had a bunch of big-time FCS offers as well. Branston had a little bit bigger interest, Arizona State, Boston College, Iowa State, Washington State. Both these guys, highly productive. They can play the run. They can rush the passer. I think they have versatility. Murray, I think, will be more of an interior defensive lineman. Branston, maybe more of a an end there, although he could potentially play on the inside as well, especially if they want to put some weight on him. He's got the frame. I mean, he's a really strong kid, a relentless motor, moves well. These guys are just highly, highly productive. And again, I think if they're just a little bit bigger, they probably end up at bigger schools, but could be real steals for this staff. And I think that CSU has had a lot of success going to Arizona these last couple years, which has been encouraging to see because there's some really big time programs out there. They land D'Angelo Higgins Jr. out of Silverado High School. He had offers from UNLV, could have gone to Utah, ended up picking CSU. I think he's a guy that could play early on for you. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for playing time in that secondary. You're basically losing everyone. I'm really hoping that Aiden Hector is coming back since they didn't honor him on senior day. But Higgins has good instincts. He's a sure tackler. I like the way he pursues and wraps up. He's not looking to pop you. So many safeties these days, they're looking to pop you. He's a really good form tackler. He takes good angles and he moves with intent. There's not a lot of wasted movement. He reads it. He waits for the play to develop and then he attacks. So many guys, you watch them out there on their huddle and they're just running around like chickens with their head cut off, hoping that the guy might actually come to them. And sometimes they make plays. Higgins, you can see he's reading it, he's assessing it, and then he's reacting. I'd say the same thing about Valenzuela, who is a star at wide receiver, but also like you can just see it defensively. You see that he sees the play developing before it happens. And I think both those guys, Higgins and Valenzuela, I think a couple years from now, we might look back at them and be just amazed that they ended up here because I think they have the potential to be really, really solid players for you and guys that could potentially play pretty early on. I don't think it's worth me getting into the specialists. For one, I'm not qualified, and there's just so little information out there on some of these guys. Like the kicker is listed as a top 20 kicker in his rankings. We'll take that for whatever it's worth. Dylan Freebury went 78 of 84 on extra points, had a career long of 47 yards. We'll see. Nathan Sutcliffe, 6'6", 245-pound punter with an Aussie rules football background. It's a mountain of a man for a punter. Good luck trying to rough him, especially with that Aussie rules football background. All right. If you have more questions about that, I'll get to them at the end, throw them this way in terms of recruiting, football, that type of stuff. I did want to hit on basketball before we get out of here because there is a big game against CU this weekend. CSU men's basketball rocking a 2-game win streak right now. Now I've got the biggest road game of the non-conference slate. An opportunity to make a statement. You got your ass kicked the last time you went to Boulder. Had a bit of a sluggish start. The game in Fort Collins last year was as good of a CSU-CU game as I can remember. Really high level basketball. I mean, obviously CU had 3 NBA players, a couple of NBA guys on CSU as well. And in my opinion, once Zay gets the call up, and Neek is certainly looking like a top 20 pick right now. But the shot making in that game was incredible. Both these rosters look so drastically different. I'm not sure how much you can take away from that. I was talking about that with some of the assistant coaches before that game the other night against LMU. Is like, how much can you even take away now that they don't have Lampkin, they don't have Cody Williams, they don't have KJ Simpson or John De Silva, but some of the actions will be similar. You have some familiarity there with Trevor Baskin as well, the Colorado Mesa transfer, who CSU was in on, and it came down to CU, and CSU unfortunately ended up in Boulder, kind of their slasher. The Buffs have shot the hell out of the 3 ball, and that's something you're going to have to be aware of. I felt like defensively, the Rams were as good as they have looked all season against LMU. Some of that was LMU just isn't very good, but I do feel like the intensity that CSU played with kind of set the tone there, and they got LMU out of a rhythm. And then more importantly, they finished those possessions with rebounds, which obviously was a major issue for CSU early on in the year. You got to defend 3 well, and then you got to finish off those possessions. Don't give them a bunch of second chance opportunities down low. Can you execute the way you have of late now in a more hostile atmosphere? We're going to play a couple clips here. This first one is Niko Medved talking about the importance of rebounding and kind of them emphasizing it a little bit more of late. Here's Medved.
No, I don't know. I mean, it's something We have been really emphasizing in practice. We've been spending more time going to the offensive glass too. That's been an area of emphasis that we haven't done in the past, and really didn't show up, in the first few games, but it has showed up here as of late, and I think that's been big for us. So we got to keep it going, that way, and it's it starts with Neek, but I think all these guys are involved. We got some guys picking. I think we had a stretch where we had towards the end of the first half, a bunch of offensive rebounds. Again, we weren't letting missed shots affect us. We kept going and making the next play, and it's kind of what we have to do this year. Sometimes for us, as we're figuring out our group on the offensive end in the half court, we're gonna have to find other ways to get the job done.
How big has it been to have Bemba back for that physical presence down low?
Man, he really doesn't practice, right? He just kind of does walk through and does some skill stuff. We're trying to save all his bullets for game day, and just having him in the lineup for 15 to 20 minutes is a game changer for us. He's so physical. He's really good defensively. He's got really good instincts, really good hands. He can seal guys in the post. It's a game changer for us. So knock on wood, hopefully we can keep him at least going in this direction, because we need his minutes.
Bemba being back has been huge. I've talked about that a lot. I wrote about it post LMU, that the rotation is just a lot smoother with Bemba out there. It allows you to bring Morton off the bench. It helps the bench unit has played better as well. I think they've really kind of figured out some of their combinations. It's been huge to have Bowen Bourne come alive. He has been better as a three-point shooter of late. Those numbers are evening out. I also feel like he's been a tremendous facilitator, and they play with a little bit more pace when he's out there. Kyan Evans coming off of a career day where he hit 4 threes. Would love to see him have another big day out on the road there. Obviously, the shot making is big, but more than anything, and especially in a hostile road environment, it's going to come down to what kind of defense can you play? What's your effort on the glass like? And can you eliminate some of the silly mistakes like turnovers? So you can get a little bit sloppy at times. I think you can turn them over, especially if they're not hitting shots when they get going from deep. You got to look out. But can you come in this game and play with intensity, play with emotion without playing emotional? And I'm going to play a clip here from Niko Medved kind of talking about that. This team has been through a lot, and I think it's been valuable from a growth standpoint. You've started to right the ship here. You've turned a corner. A win in Boulder, especially if you could follow it up with a good performance against VCU, like that could really spark your season and get it rolling here. You've had a slow start out of the gate. There are a lot of new pieces. It was always going to be that way. I wrote it before the year. Admittedly, it was more sluggish than I expected at the start. I think I just made up a word there. But they are ascending at the rate that I anticipated. And I said from the beginning that this team will be a hell of a lot more dangerous come, February and March than they are in November. And I think there's going to be some moments where you see that talent flash like it did the other night. And then we're going to be some moments that made you want to rip your hair out, like UC Riverside. And to be honest, it's been exactly what we anticipated. It's been a roller coaster. They're starting to steady things out here, and that's been encouraging. I think the mentality offensively has been big. I think Bemba being out there opens things up on the perimeter. It allows you to have some driving lanes as well, because you can't just double Neek all the time and basically dare anybody else to make a shot. I like how they've looked these last couple of games here, but now you've got to build off of it. And again, can you keep your emotion in check? And here is Niko Medved kind of talking about exactly that. I think it's the guys probably prefer to play in electric atmospheres, but was there maybe some of going out to the NTE where, they're not the most crowded, where there's kind of a nice element to just kind of play and not have to do it with maybe as much pressure?
I think so. I think it was good to play, to whatever power for, opponents that way. And I think even though we went 1-1, I think after beating TCU, I think the guys, sometimes you have to have it go your way to kind of believe you can do it, and those guys hung in there. And after the disappointment of the Washington game, I thought was right there for the taking. Got to get up in 14 hours and go play the next opponent. And I thought that was great. Sometimes it's great to be on the road together too. You get to spend maybe even a little bit more time doing stuff as a team together. So I think it was good for us. And thank God it showed today. Like we were able to get some momentum from that game, and it showed up here tonight.
Sort of in the same vein, do you think you've played a bunch of close games? Does that almost force feed growth?
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, 3 overtime games. We've had 2 threes banked in right against us to go to overtime. It's been kind of wild. Every game has just gone right down the wire. I think you get better doing that, right? Playing in close games and understanding what it takes to win, and maybe that does force growth for our team. And it's a long year, you just got to keep going. And now we turn the page into December. November is what it is, but we learned and got better, hopefully, about ourselves. And now we got to keep going, and we got to be a lot better this month than we were in November.
What do you tell Niko going into this return to Boulder?
I didn't tell him anything. Just keep doing what he's doing. I'm not going to make. I think the one thing about rivalry games is, in this one, we'll talk about it, but I think sometimes, if the guys know what it is, right? And you got to remember too, yes, there's extra emotion and you love that, but you got to play with emotion, but not emotional. When you do that, you get out of character. And if you get out of character, you're not going to play well. So you have to bring tremendous fight and tenacity, but you don't need to do anything different. You got to just do the things and make winning plays over and over again that give yourself an opportunity to win. Listen, he's a 5th-year senior. He's been through it. He knows what this is. And I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a great opportunity for us to go on the road, hostile environment. I think it's going to be fun.
How important is this game for the state and local interests in college basketball?
It's huge. I mean, I think rivalries are what makes college sports. I mean, the fact that people talk about them. I thought the game, 2 years ago down there, obviously we played really, really poorly, but, they had just announced Coach Prime. I can still hear it when he walked into the arena after announcing. I don't know if I've ever heard a place that loud.
It was like wrestling.
It was like a pro wrestling. I agree. It was like going to the UFC or something, And then the atmosphere here in Moby last year for that game was just outrageous, right? It was awesome. And so I hope it's the same way, down there. But it means a lot. There's no question about it. You'd be trying to say if it doesn't mean more, right, than the other games. But even with that said, you still have to play the basketball game, right? It's still, can we out-rebound it? Can we get back in transition? Can we take care of the ball? Can we guard their actions effectively? Can we pass and catch? Can we knock down big shots? Can we make our free throws? So regardless of who you're playing, you still have to do the things that allow you to win. Now, there's extra emotion involved and all that stuff. But it's kind of like, they used to say in the Old West, right? It's not the guy who's fastest on the draw that always wins. It's the guy who can stay calm under pressure right now and actually get aimed. It can't be ready, shoot, aim, right? You do that, you get killed, right? But some guys who can stay calm, right, and do that, and that's what we got to do down there, is have tremendous focus and tenacity, but we got to play the game the right way.
I thought that was a really important perspective from Niko Medved. One of the things I talked about after the football Rocky Mountain Showdown is I felt like the guys were tense. I think they were tight. I felt like the stakes were maybe emphasized a little bit too much throughout the week. And young guys, they didn't thrive in that situation. You've got to be realistic. You understand that this game, it does mean more. But you've got to play with emotion. You got to play with passion without getting out of character, without getting emotional and having it completely take over you. It doesn't allow you to play your best ball. I'll never forget what it was like when Dion walked into the Coors Event Center a couple years ago. I mean, it was unreal. It was like John Cena returning to WrestleMania or something with the way that the crowd popped. And it changed. It impacted that game in a major way. CSU was right there. They were in it. The energy in the building changed that day. Completely went out the door. Last year, awesome atmosphere in Moby. Felt like CSU played into it. This year, I'm interested to see what's the crowd like. It's usually a better atmosphere when the game's in Fort Collins than Boulder, just being real. CSU Hoops fans show up more consistently than CU Hoops supporters do. I'm sure there'll be people there, especially with it being on a Saturday. Sometimes the game being like in the middle of the week can impact it. But this is a big opportunity here for you to spark your season. The Rams really need a victory in this one for their at-large hopes down the line, but also just for getting everybody excited, having some energy going into the conference league, going to Boulder and get your ass kicked. It's not going to feel too great vibes-wise going into the league slate because the Mountain West looks pretty dang good this year. Before we get out of here, Got the Mountain West Championship game tonight. Lots at stake. Admittedly, I'm kind of rooting for UNLV, mostly because I want to see the committee be put in that position of what do we do? Because they said coming in that if you were top 10, you were more or less playing for seeding, which would imply that Boise State would be in either way. I don't see any world in which the committee actually follows through that and puts 2 Mountain West teams in the playoff. But I am here for the chaos, and I want to see if it could come true. Can UNLV slow down GNT enough? They did a good job of making them work for everything. They're going to stack the box a ton. But then Boise, can you limit UNLV's explosive plays? UNLV's got some legit speed at wideout. Ricky White is a stud. They run the ball well. DeJesus is another guy that can burn you. Boise's been a little bit susceptible to the big play at times. Can UNLV create enough big plays to make Boise keep pace with you? And then can you prevent those big runs? Like, can you make Ashton Jeanty have to go all the way down the field, 3-4 yards a pop? Fine. But don't break off those 50 to 60 yarders. Those are what are so backbreaking about him, is that, 2-3 times a game, he just takes one touch to the house and completely flips the entire game there. He's the best running back I've ever seen in the Mountain West. And there have been some pretty dang good ones over the years between Jay Ajayi and, I think back to, obviously there've been some really solid CSU ones, Cecil Sapp, Capri. There've been some good ones, but Jeanty's unreal. I think he's going to be a top 15 NFL draft pick. That's all I've got for you guys this morning. So much love to everybody in Ram Nation. I will be in Boulder tomorrow night. I'll have post-game coverage, so keep your eyes out for all that, written takeaways. I'll do a podcast over the weekend breaking it down, the results as well. Always proud to be y'all. Much love. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.